On today's show, will the Capitals be ready or rusty in game number one? I'll discuss next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the last 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Caps Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the Caps as they prepare for game number 1 in the second round. We're starting it off all over again against the Hurricanes. What can we expect from the Capitals in game 1? I'll talk about that a bit later. Anthony Beauvillier, a player that was picked up at the trade deadline. And to be clear here, I don't think there was real high hopes for him. I think that they saw him as a depth move. I'll talk about why Anthony Beauvillier has been better than expected. Later, I'll talk about Tom Wilson's impact. We will never forget his contributions, or his biggest contribution, shall we say, in game number 4 against the Canadiens. Tilted the ice in the Capitals' favor, and why, in a large way, they moved on to the second round. But just to get it going here, we'll talk about the Capitals as they prepare for game number 1 of the second round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs, and a lot of questions surrounding the Capitals. At the break seem to be exactly what the doctor ordered at exactly the right time. As coming off that Canadian series, you got to think a lot of the players are maybe a little sore, maybe a little bit dinged up, that maybe some of the players that were really feeling it, or maybe some of the players that were almost borderline not being in the mix in game 1 will be full go in game number 1. Now, that's one way of looking at it. Another way, however, of looking at it is will the Capitals be rusty to start this series, as they have had some extended time off? So, it's kind of a good thing. I think that, what they say, something that's in motion stays in motion. That I think in a lot of ways that had the Capitals had a shorter break, that might have been more advantageous, as they were playing with a lot of momentum. So that momentum snowball, if you will, has to get going again. And, the players spending time at home with their wife and kids, or whatever the case might be, kind of took their head out of the game for a little bit. Now it's time to batten down the hatches again and get ready for warfare against a Carolina Hurricanes team where, in a lot of different metrics, it shows that the Carolina Hurricanes are a better team. And many of those predictors or indicators favor the Hurricanes winning round number 1. So let's dive into the latest with the Capitals as they prepare for action in game 1 of the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And all things considered, I'm feeling very good about the Capitals right now. I know that, I like to push outside the outside noise as much as I can, try to be a neophyte as much as I can, and just try to keep it internal, because if you let a lot of the outside noise in, that can sometimes skew your opinion. Now, the very fact that the Capitals are in the playoffs at all is something that those same insiders that said the Capitals are going to be eliminated against the Hurricanes, those same voices last summer said the Capitals weren't good enough to make it to the playoffs. So that's why I think it's important to put some weight into it, but don't put all your eggs in those experts' baskets, if you will. So today we're getting you set for round 2 of the Stanley Cup playoffs, where the Caps get ready to face the Canes. Puck drop, of course, Tuesday night at Cap One. Now, the biggest thing the Capitals need to circle here is the momentum starts at home at Cap One. The Capitals need to make the most of this opportunity. If they can take the first 2 games and have a 2-0 lead in this series, that definitely puts the momentum in their favor. You saw that impact in the first round against the Canadiens, that I think the Capitals need to do their level best to hit the ground running in game number 1. We do not want to let the Hurricanes into this game. It has to be a full 60-minute game. And I've preached that, and Spencer Carbery and everyone's preached it all season long, They need to do it. And even if they have a lead, they cannot take their foot off the gas. If you want to take a look at a prime example, take a look at the Blues in Winnipeg series. That came down to the wire, and the Winnipeg Jets skated away victorious. That is kind of exemplifies that you need to play that full game. So let's start with the big story, the break. What was supposed to be a short rest turned into nearly a full week off after the St. Louis Blues forced a Game 7 in their series against Winnipeg. And, a week off, it was probably good to spend time with family and friends and just take a load off, as it is a long season. The hockey season is a long one and a very physical series. If you take a look at the NBA, and I'm not here to disparage the NBA other than to say some players leave with, sore ankles or, calves that are a little flexed up, and then you take a look at hockey players like the hit that Wilson laid out on Carrier. And at the end of the day, Carrier skated off the ice. So it definitely is a physical game that I don't think gets enough. I think that it's good that they get this rest, but I just hope it wasn't too much a rest. So now, is that good or bad? I guess we don't know. We kind of dealt with this same thing after the Four Nations face-off of what kind of Capitals team were we going to see coming out of that. So I think it's important to put some weight into it, but not exclusively. The Capitals closed out the Canadiens last Wednesday. Carolina wrapped up against New Jersey the day before, so both teams are coming in rested. So I guess it's all about mindset. It almost has to be a first, like these guys that get called in for military maneuvers, like you're resting 1 minute and scramble the jets. We got someone coming into our airspace. You got to be ready to go like right now. So the Capitals are going from 0 to 100 from, around a week's time off here to full game action. They need to be ready because, like we say, the Canes, they had a lot of time off as well. I think it's going to be about mental toughness in this series, and the team that is able to just really get into it right off the moment's notice. So as soon as the game starts, I think that the team that scores the first goal, I think that will set the tone for not only the first game, but at least the first two games of the series. Now, 6 days for the Canes, 5 for the Caps. Spencer Carbery originally liked the idea of a short breather, which I agree with, but the Blues won, extending the schedule. It forced the team into more idle time than expected. So all things considered, it is what it is. I mean, the Capitals didn't really get any choice. They didn't ask them, how long of a break you would like, but it's all about that mental toughness. And at the end of the day, they're professional athletes. And we know that this team can dig deep a lot better than we've seen in previous years, where they faced any kind of opposition and they were just sticking their head in their turtle shell saying, tell me when it's over. That if you take a look even at the first round, even though you would take a look at the wins and losses in the first round, it seemed like it was decisive for the Capitals. Bounces here or there could have definitely won at least 1 or 2 more games, I think, for the Canadiens. So the Capitals need to maintain their momentum, right out of the gate, and hopefully that can help propel them forward. But Spencer Carbery had a quote. He said, quote, "I think there's pros. I think it would be maybe be a happy medium to start Sunday or Monday. Tuesday is a little bit of a lengthy break, which it will be, but we're going to have been off for 5 days. I also think you can use it to your advantage," unquote. So how did the Capitals make use of their time off? Thursday off, optional skate Friday, full practice Saturday, off Sunday, practice Monday, and according to players like Strome and Mangiapane, the vibe is locked in. And I think that the Capitals shouldn't deviate too much from what got them here, that we hear a lot of weight being put into locker room chemistry and all of that. And why I'm not a big believer in it, I think that if you have, your morale in a good place, and I think that, those pregame antics, I'm talking about bands that make them dance with Ovechkin and the crazy dance between Carlson and Wilson and all the stuff that's going out in the tunnel there. Those are the things that have worked for the Capitals all season long. So I think don't try to fix something that isn't broke. That if you can go into it, carefree, going into it in a positive mindset, then I'm out there I'm playing hockey with my friends. I think that has worked for the Capitals all season long. I think they should continue in that. And I don't think we should overthink if it's been too much time. I think that those are the people that are looking for ways that things that can go wrong. I'm just bringing it up as something to consider as we get going in this series here. But taking a look at it, Strome said it best, quote, "Rest is always good for us. When we have a little bit of a lighter schedule, it seems like we're pretty dialed in." That's a good sign heading into a brutal matchup. And that leads us to the next segment, the heavyweights that are going to be in this tournament. I'm talking Tom Wilson and the role that I think physicality will play in this series. What kind of role does Tom Wilson and physicality, what kind of role does that have for the Capitals? And what will it mean in round number 2? I'll discuss straight ahead.
An award-winning mattress can change your life. I speak from experience. It happened to me. After years of uncomfortable sleeps, I recently switched to Bear Mattress, and the results were instant. Bear Mattress is designed with a focus on recovery, cooling, and pressure relief to upgrade your sleep and improve your overall quality of life. I used to deal with night sweats, but Bear's best-in-class cooling ensures optimal temperature regulation, which prevents overheating and helps me stay comfortable all night long. Bear offers a wide variety of mattresses, but to get the right one for you, take their sleep quiz that matches you to your perfect mattress based on body type and sleep preferences. Go to bearmattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout to get 40% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. You have to use my promo code on the very last page of checkout to get this discount. That's bearmattress.com. Use my promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get 40% off site-wide. Bearmattress.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL.
All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So the role of physicality, we've heard about it all playoff season long. In the first round, we talked about the physical advantage, or at least the perceived physical advantage that the Capitals had over the Canadiens. Even though there was a decent amount of pushback in the physical department from the Canadiens, how big of a role can physicality play in the second round here? I still think, just much like the first round, that the Capitals have the advantage over the Hurricanes as far as the physicality is concerned. I'm talking Wilson, I'm talking Duhaime, these kind of guys, and not to mention Alex Ovechkin at 39 years old is not afraid of throwing around the body. At some point could be detrimental. I guess we don't know. I think a fully engaged Alex Ovechkin is a good Alex Ovechkin, but the guy that stirs the drink as far as physicality is concerned is none other than number 43, your future captain of the Capitals. Let's hear it for Tom Wilson. Let's talk about the role that he plays with the Capitals. When we talk about the Capitals' round 1 win over the Canadiens, there are, quite a few names that jump out. Ovechkin, of course, 4 goals in the series. Dylan Strome, Connor McMichael. But I don't think anybody embodies the edge of a playoff hockey quite like Tom Wilson. And not just because of the penalty minutes. Wilson had a massive impact in the Montreal series. He tallied 4 points in 5 games, including goals in 4 and 5. But when you take a look at it, his impact was just as physical as it was on the scoreboard. This guy with over 1,500 career penalty minutes and 9 suspensions. But in the later games, Wilson turned that intensity into results. And, again, I recite the hit on Carrier quite often as it changed the momentum in the Capitals' favor. As you take a look at the Canadiens, had quite a bit of momentum winning their first game at Bell Center, and they were kind of running away with it in the second game at Bell Center, that it was a perfectly placed hit by Tom Wilson that took Carrier out of that game, at least that one game, and it tilted it in the Capitals' advantage. And it was a bit of a risky move on Tom Wilson's part, because you take a look at it, there is his play out on the ice is under the magnifying glass. That if he is reckless, if a player, if it was a late hit, or say a player got greatly injured by some reckless play, it could mean suspension for one of the most impactful players on the Capitals bench. So let's take a look back in time here. It wasn't that long, but game one, an assist on Ovechkin's power play goal and a heavy presence throughout over 22 minutes on ice. Big impact. Game two, more physicality, another assist in a scuffle with Josh Anderson that foreshadowed what could become a playoff subplot. And it's interesting that, Josh Anderson and Tom Wilson, they go way back, that they are fierce competitors, that Josh Anderson said he hates the comparisons to Tom Wilson. And when you see them out on the ice, the physicality, them going at it at the bench, just an all-out battle. It's almost, when you look at it after the fact, it's like two brothers fighting. Because what did we notice when it was the handshake line after? It was all hugs and smiles between Josh Anderson and Tom Wilson. But game three, it boiled over. That brotherly love, I guess you could say, between Wilson and Anderson wrestled into the Capitals bench. The penalty box time at 12 minutes, the discipline lacking. What was that all about? Of course, Tom Wilson was trying to push aside the chirping. He was trying to push away the invitations to drop the mitts until he could take no more. One of the things I will say about Tom Wilson, like I've said, is he's not your typical goon. He doesn't relish the fact, at least he doesn't, I don't think anymore, of dropping the mitts at a moment's notice. He doesn't have to answer to everyone that wants to fight to him. But I think he was getting pushed around, and I think the chirping and the invitations to fight were too much, and that is what led it to boil over. Game four, though, Wilson turned a corner, setting a hit on Alex Carrier, which wasn't whistled. It changed the momentum of the third period. Washington tied it, then took control, and Wilson added an empty netter to seal it 5-2. That is definitely going to be one of the descriptors of the 24-25 season and the playoffs, and how the Capitals at least won round number one. It'll be interesting to see what kind of role and what kind of subplots are in round number two. But make no mistake about it, Tom Wilson's hit is one of the biggest headlines that I could use to summarize, or keyword, if you will, of round number one. Game five, same story, composed, dangerous, and impactful. A power play goal and assist, nearly 24 minutes on ice, no time in the box. It was all business for Tom Wilson and the Capitals in game number five. They knew what was at stake. They were playing at home in front of their fans. They did not want to go back to the raucous of Bell Center. So it was like a business mission. It was a military maneuver. Get in, get out, keep your head dialed in. Don't let the outside noise in, and take care of business. That is what they need to do in round number two as well. When he stays focused, Wilson is one of the most dangerous players in the league. Make no mistake about it. And Carbery knows it. Ovechkin knows it. And the Hurricanes will definitely get a chance to know it. Facing a relentless forechecking team like Carolina, it's not going to be easy. The Caps will need Wilson's edge. He can be a momentum changer. You saw the advantage in the game against Carolina and the Capitals with that Jalen Chatfield physicality on Connor McMichael. Listen, that has not been forgotten by the Capitals, and I expect Tom Wilson or someone on the ice, Duhaime, someone of that nature, to settle that score. I know it was a bit answered here, in a latter game there, but I still think that the Capitals have not forgotten about that hit. And also, just historically, the fisticuffs, Svechnikov wanting to fight Alex Ovechkin, and Alex Ovechkin knocking him out, where Pierre Maguire's like, we need a medic out on the ice. Get a medic out here. That if you want to take on the Capitals and their physicality, you better pack a lunch, because it's not going to be easy. And if the Capitals need to dig into their physicality, that's what they should do. But I don't think it should be just crazy bull in the china shop, because that is not sustainable. The Capitals above all end all is to win the series and to take it all the way to the Stanley Cup finals and, dare I say, win a Stanley Cup, that we can't risk injury just knocking everyone into the boards for a full 60 minutes. You need to be tactful. You need to finish your checks, but you need to avoid the craziness, the melee behind the net when the whistle's blown and you're cross-checking people and just pulling people down to the ice. That is nonsense, and that is not what got the Capitals to win game number 5, and that's not what got them to win the first number round. Tasteful, tactful physicality is what is needed. But if the Capitals are going to play well, it's going to be Tom Wilson leading the charge. You take a look at, the game number 4, it was dialed in. It was just that tactful, perfectly placed hit. That is what we need to see in round number 2, a sniper, if you will, in the physicality department. I think if the Capitals adhere to what they did in round number 1 and even clean up some of that stuff. We saw Alexiev get involved a little bit in game number 1 in the first round. To just dial it in, we need a composed team that knows when to exude and exert physicality. I think the Capitals, the leadership, they have what it takes to take down the Hurricanes, despite all the outside noise that says the Hurricanes are favored winners over the Capitals. Let's hope we can prove the skeptics and the cynics wrong yet again. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about the impact of Anthony Beauvillier. I'm going to be honest with you here as Capitals fans. At the trade deadline, when I heard that they traded for and acquired Anthony Beauvillier, I wasn't screaming like, yeah. I'm thinking to myself, third line, maybe sitting up in the press box as a healthy scratch. What did we see him playing on the first line? Strome, Ovechkin. But he has a history of doing that. He played with Crosby. What kind of impact can Anthony Beauvillier have with the Capitals in round number 2? I'll discuss straight ahead. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Look no further than Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you feel fuller longer. Now, personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days, whether I'm snacking at my desk on a road trip or just need a quick protein boost. They're always my go-to snack. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. So get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. In the final segment here, we are going to talk about the impact of Anthony Beauvillier, a guy that started his career with just bursting on the scene with the Islanders and has been a bit of a journeyman around the league since then. His most recent stop before the Capitals was on the Penguins. But, when you took a look at it, you see a guy that had a great start with the Islanders, played on a couple different teams, played most recently at the Penguins. You think, what's so good about this guy? He's bounced here, he's bounced there. But when you take a look at even the role that he played with the Penguins, he had some time playing with Crosby. And what have we noticed in his time with the Capitals? That he played with Ovechkin and Strome on the top line. So I think that he has exceeded my expectations. I think he's probably exceeded some of your expectations. What kind of role has Beauvillier played with the Capitals, and what can we expect going forward? Let's dive into that in the final segment here. The Caps picked up Beauvillier at the trade deadline from the Pens for a second rounder. And to be clear here, there were some questions about a second rounder. What are you doing here? We want to restock the pond here. But that second rounder was pretty much a late second round, so kind of a third round pick. It wasn't a flashy move, and honestly, it was met with a shrug by a lot of fans, including myself. But right now, it's playing off huge. But a lot of questions now. I think that he has filled a big role in Alexei Protas's absence. But now that Pro is back, what do we do? But in Protas's absence, Beauvillier was slotted in on the top line with Stromer and O. And wow, did he deliver. 5 games, 5 points, clutch plays in every single game. And it's interesting about Anthony Beauvillier is he's not the biggest guy out on the ice, but he knows how to move. He's a great skater. He's a great playmaker, and he puts himself in the right position at just the right time. So clutch plays in every game. Game 1, a goal and an assist. Game 2, primary helper on the game-winning goal. And game 3 and 4, more assists. Game 5, he did not slow down. All clutch the entire way. So when you take a look at the role that Anthony Beauvillier, and it's just a kind of a cautionary tale that look at the analytics, what kind of player did the Capitals acquire? Because like I talked about there, it was met with a lot of skepticism. Chris Patrick, Brian McClellan, the powers that be with the Capitals, they saw a diamond in the rough. But Beauvillier said something interesting at practice. He said, quote, "There's something about important games that get me more focused," unquote. And I think that the Capitals can rise to the occasion. Not just Anthony Beauvillier. He hasn't been here that long, but the Capitals in general, that oftentimes this season we saw them play well up to teams and not so great playing down to teams. But his focus played really showed. This is the same guy who scored the OT winner for the Islanders in Game 6 back in 2021 to force a Game 7 against the Lightning. Clutch. That's the kind of thing that we need to see from Anthony Beauvillier in round number 2. Does he have a game-winning goal against the Hurricanes coming up here? It could be exciting. The big thing I like about him, he's a gamer, and for right now, he's clicking with the Caps best. The tough part, like I said, where does he fit in now that Pro's in? But Coach Carbery has praised Beauvillier's versatility, calling him, quote, "a Swiss Army knife," unquote. He can shift lines, play either wing, and handle pressure. But the big question now is what happens to Pro? I know that we tried to slowly kind of work him back into the lineup. We saw him playing lower in the bottom 6, but is Pro going to stay in the bottom 6 considering all the goals that he put up? Or will Anthony Beauvillier's play in the first round secure his place with that top 6 of the team? That is what remains to be seen. What we did see is Protas returned in Game 5 after recovering from that skate cut. Ouch. More and more of these cuts and these different injuries, I think that there's going to need to be more safety measures in place. I know we can't wrap them up in bubble wrap, but we got to do more. That cut against Protas looked very painful, and it sidelined him for a long period of time. But Beauvillier stayed on that top line, and barring something unexpected, I don't see that changing anytime soon. They're going to go with it unless it breaks. If all of a sudden Beauvillier dries up, or say Pro just really lights it up playing on the third line or fourth line, whatever the case might be, I think that they could make adjustments. But don't try to shake up the snow globe too much. It worked. Beauvillier worked on that top line in round number 1, even though that wasn't where he was projected to be. Sometimes I think you need to take those projections and throw them in the garbage. What's clear to me is the chemistry. Beauvillier plays with pace, he has good instincts, and has a knack for finding open space. Perfect traits to complement Strome's vision and Ovechkin's shooting. Bottom line, he has earned the spot, and it's his until he does something that makes Carbery believe he doesn't earn it. So big takeaways here. Tom Wilson playing with control and force is going to be the keys for success. Beauvillier continuing to shine in big moments, and the team staying sharp after a rare playoff layoff. A puck drop tomorrow night. It's going to be at 6 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Eastern, excuse me. It is going to be one that you're going to want to watch. I think that, like I say, another key for success is making the most of your opportunity in game number 1 at home. That is something that cannot be overlooked. If they had this series started in Carolina, in Raleigh, that would be a totally different story. I don't think it would have been the end of the world, but if you can find a way to vacuum up the momentum from playing in front of your home crowd, that's something that is more advantageous than I think is you can quantify. So the Capitals need to make the most of that opportunity. They need to shake off any rust that might be there, and this team needs to go in like a military mission. Focused, concentrate at the task at hand, and to quote Davey Martinez, go 1-0 every single game. If the Capitals can do that, I think they can take care of the Canes. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.